Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we are diving into a massive 800-year journey through the history of the Malay Archipelago. We're talking about how warfare, technology, and culture totally collided to shape one of the most dynamic regions on the planet. From huge naval armadas crossing the Indian Ocean to tragic royal massacres, and then the game-changing arrival of gunpowder. This is a story all about adaptation, survival, and memory. Let's get right into it.
So, you might be wondering, how exactly did warfare evolve over those 800 years in the archipelago? Well, it definitely wasn't just a simple upgrade in swords and shields. What we're actually looking at here is a massive, macro-historical shift. You see, conflict evolved from these vast maritime trade wars out at sea, right down into intense political sieges in city squares, all the way to the desperate adaptation of advanced firearms. And each of these eras didn't just change how battles were fought. They fundamentally rewired the geopolitics and the cultural identities of millions of people.
To break this all down, we'll follow a three-act chronological journey. We'll start with the eras of conflict, then hit the 1025 Srivijaya surprise and the 1357 tragedy at Bubat. After that, we'll look at the arrival of firearms, dive into the Book of Weaponry, and finally wrap up with the legacies of archipelago warfare.
All right, starting off with Section 1, the eras of conflict. This is where we see how trade, honor, and technology really acted as the primary catalysts for warfare in the region.
Which brings us right into Act I. Section 2, the Srivijaya surprise in 1025.
Okay, to really grasp this conflict, you have to understand that the Srivijaya Empire, based in modern-day Sumatra, was an absolute powerhouse. I mean, they held a complete iron-grip monopoly on maritime trade passing through Southeast Asia. If you wanted to trade between India and China, you played by Srivijaya's rules. But then, they clashed with another superpower, the Chola dynasty from southern India, and it is wild how rapidly things went downhill. Back in 1006 CE, relations were actually incredibly peaceful. The Srivijayan king even funded a Buddhist monastery, a vihara, right inside Chola territory in India. But just 19 years later, in 1025 CE, the Chola emperor Rajendra I launched this devastating sudden naval invasion straight across the ocean. The impact was permanent. By 1077 CE, Chinese records show that Tamil Cholas were essentially dominating trade missions out of Kedah, completely usurping that long-held Srivijaya monopoly.
So how did they do it? Well, Srivijaya's defense strategy was entirely based on guarding the major choke points, specifically the Malacca and Sunda Straits. They completely expected any threat to just sail down the standard trade routes. But the Cholas' attack was, honestly, a tactical masterpiece. They bypassed those heavily guarded straits entirely. Instead, they sailed directly across the open Indian Ocean to Sumatra's west coast, resupplied at the port of Baharus, and then attacked from the south via the Sunda Strait. Srivijaya was caught completely blind. Their capital, Palembang, was sacked, and their king was actually captured. Basically, the Srivijayan Mandala never fully recovered from this surprise assault. Moving from the high seas to the city squares, we enter Act 2, Section 3, the tragedy at Bubat in 1357.
This is where warfare shifts from sea trade dominance to fierce political subjugation and royal betrayal. We're looking at the mighty Majapahit Empire and their western neighbor, the Sunda Kingdom. To really get the scale of this event, think about this number, 2,200. That is the number of vessels. We're talking 200 large ships and 2,000 smaller craft that carried the Sundanese king, his royal family, and his beautiful daughter, Princess Daya Pitaloka, across the Java Sea to Majapahit. Now, they were there for a joyous occasion, right? The princess was supposed to marry the Majapahit king, Hayam Wuruk. It was a massive royal wedding procession, but they were unknowingly sailing directly into a deadly political trap, set by the ambitious Majapahit Prime Minister, Gajah Mada.
When the Sundanese arrived at Bubat Square in the Majapahit capital, Gajah Mada pulled a complete bait-and-switch. He demanded that the princess not be treated as a queen, but instead handed over as a mere concubine, basically a token of Sunda's submission to Majapahit. As you can imagine, the Sundanese king was furious and flat-out refused. What followed was an impossibly uneven skirmish. Fewer than 100 Sundanese nobles and guards were completely surrounded by thousands of heavily armed Majapahit troops. As the 15th century chronicle The Prera Ratan tragically puts it, like a sea of blood and a mountain of carcasses, there is no Sundanese left. The king and his nobles fought bravely to the bitter end, but they were completely massacred.
Now here is where the history gets super fascinating. We're looking at the historical erasure of Bubat. The most famous primary source for Majapahit history is the 14th century Nagara Kretagama. But get this, it omits this massive battle entirely. The court poet intentionally overlooked it. Why? Well, because it didn't exactly glorify the empire. If anything, it highlighted Gajah Mada's huge political failure to peacefully subjugate Sunda. His heavy-handed tactics shamed the Majapahit court and actually forced him into early retirement. So the truth of Bubat was basically hidden, and it was only preserved by outside texts, like the Balinese Kirong Sunda and the Sudanese Karita Parayangan.
To understand why the outnumbered Sudanese didn't just surrender, you really have to look at their cultural code. This brings up the concept of puputan. Rooted in the Kshatriya warrior caste code of honor, a puputan is a fight to the death by the men, followed by a mass ritual suicide by the women. Facing the absolutely horrific prospect of humiliation, rape, or enslavement by the Majapahit forces, tradition says Princess Daya Pitaloka and the remaining Sudanese women tragically took their own lives. It was their final, desperate way to protect their pride, their chastity, and the dignity of their kingdom.
All right, let's move into Act 3, Section 4, the arrival of firearms. So, the archipelago's massive wealth obviously continued to attract global powers, and soon enough, a brand new, devastating technology arrived on their shores: gunpowder. The local kingdoms had to adapt incredibly fast if they wanted to survive. Just look at this number, 3,000. When the Portuguese conquered the great city of Malacca in 1511, they didn't just find standard swords and spears. Historical records tell us that 3,000 pieces of artillery were captured when the city capitulated. 3,000! So while the locals might have been somewhat outgunned by specific types of European firearms, they were absolutely not strangers to artillery. The sheer volume of weapons captured proves this region was already highly militarized and rapidly absorbing foreign military tech. Which perfectly sets up Section 5, the Book of Weaponry, also known as the Kitab Ilmu Badil.
Now, this manuscript is no ordinary military manual. It's a literal ethno-historical treasure, officially recognized by the UNESCO Memory of the World program. Written out in beautiful gold ink with these stunning arabesque decorations, this specific copy from the 1860s outlines knowledge that had been practiced since the 16th century. It documents exactly how Malay society internalized and truly mastered these alien technologies over hundreds of years. It's just an incredibly vital reference that details everything from the manufacturing of firearms to shooting techniques and even ammunition.
The synthesis of archipelagic warfare found in this book is just truly unique. The text proves that local gunsmiths weren't just blindly copying the Europeans, they were completely localizing the technology. Step 1 was mastering European matchlock design. They figured out how to make the Istingara, which is a local matchlock gun, by intricately twisting flat bars of really tough beaten iron into hollow cylinders. But step 2 is where it gets distinctly regional. They combine this physical engineering with Islamic and Malay metaphysics. I mean, the manual actually applies Sufism and traditional spiritual beliefs to achieve precise marksmanship. It is this absolutely perfect fusion of imported European hardware with indigenous spiritual epistemology.
As we get near the end of our explainer today, it's time to zoom out. Section 6, Legacies of Archipelago Warfare. You see, these massive shifts in trade routes, the tragic battles, and the frantic arms races, they didn't just vanish into the past. They left deep, lasting imprints that actually continue to shape the modern cultural and geopolitical landscape of Southeast Asia today. That Chola invasion back in 1025? It was so devastating to maritime trade that it permanently shifted the center of power on Java away from the coast, giving rise to these powerful agricultural inland kingdoms like Kediri. And the Bubat tragedy of 1357 sparked literally 600 years of inter-ethnic animosity between the Sundanese and the Javanese. It even birthed this long-standing cultural myth that strictly forbade marriages between the two groups. What's amazing is that formal cultural reconciliation only just happened in 2018. Regional governors finally agreed to cross-name major arterial streets after each other's heroes, effectively putting an end to a 6th-century-old grievance. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. How do these ancient texts, myths, and weapons continue to shape modern historical memory and regional identities today? History's never just stuck in the past, right? It lives on in the streets we walk, the myths we tell, and the manuscripts we preserve. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and we'll see you next time.